Today I am going to show you how to clean and restore tom tracks using JST Subdestroyer. Hello dudes and dudettes, my name is Javi Perera. I am a Spanish sound engineer, session musician, especially singing, arranger and composer based on Cambridge, UK. Hence my accent. Have you ever been in that situation in which you have a project with drum tracks with lots and lots of bleed leaking from the other elements of the drum kit, especially on tom tracks? Have you ever found yourself cleaning those tom tracks just to realize that once you clean them, you sacrifice the natural tail and decay, resulting in a chopped sound on the spot mic tracks, and having to rely on the overhead tracks to recover that tail, which, I have to say, lacks quite a lot of low frequencies. I didn't want to rely on tom samples to recover them. In fact, I kinda wanted to make the original tracks sound like they were sampled. So, in some sort of way, I have to synthesize the tail and decay of those toms. And that's where JST Subdestroyer comes into play. Warning! This can be an advanced trick for some people, because it requires to go deep into routing and tweaking parameters of some plugins. My original technique uses native plugins and another processing, but I managed to adapt it in order to use JST Subdestroyer and achieve practically the same result. So that said, let's get rid of my ugly face and let's do this! Okay, so here we are with our drum project, and here you have the tom tracks. As you might see on the waveform, it has quite a lot of bleed coming through, so it's going to be a bit of a challenge to clean this mess. First of all, we are going to listen to the project, but I am going to make sure that the overhead track is muted, so all the cymbals that you're going to listen from this moment are coming from the tom tracks, because I have already applied the processing on the kick and the snare tracks, so they are clean. Let's have a listen to it. Pretty noisy, huh? I have already cleaned the tom 1 and the tom 2 tracks, so we are going to focus on the tom 3 track, which is the floor tom. Actually, this track has got some interesting passages that will be useful for this walkthrough. Before we start, I will make sure that every single element of the drum track is muted, and I'm going to put the pan to the center on the tom 3. Let's try putting an instance of JST Tominator. I'm going to start fiddling out with this. As you might see, this does its job, but not as surgical as I would like. The cut is quite abrupt and it has that sound. It's triggered by some snare hits, and even with the cutoff, you can still hear the bleed coming through. Quieter, yes, but it's still there. I am too lazy to start writing automation curves on the attack, release, threshold, and whatsoever. And that's when I started to be creative and tried to achieve the same result in a different way. So, what do you need to do first is to convert your audio track into a MIDI file. I have already done this, and I named my track as Tom 3 Trigger. Use the method that suits you best to make the conversion from audio to MIDI as long as it works. But you have to bear in mind two things. One, all the MIDI notes have to have the same length. And two, you have to make sure that the MIDI notes are exactly aligned to the transients of the audio file. We are going to use this track to sidechain the MIDI information into the audio track. To do this, make sure that the audio is selected in none and the MIDI is selected in all. Then, we are going to start putting the first plugin on our effects chain, which is FabFilter Pro G. This will act as our main noise gate and it will be triggered with every single note from the MIDI track. To make sure that this is happening, you have to go down here where MIDI Learn is and make sure that the Enable MIDI feature is active. On the expert mode, you can either reduce completely the range of detection of the sidechain or you can select to external instead of internal. With this, you will make sure that no audio signal is going to trigger the gate by accident. Then adjust the attack to the fastest you can and the hold between 1 to 5 milliseconds to retain some of the transient of the audio track. And adjust the release to taste. I put it around 250 milliseconds. Let's listen to the results so far. Can you see how this light is turning on? That means that the MIDI notes are triggering the noise gate. So far, I'm happy with the result. Our next plugin on the chain is going to be FabFilter Pro MB. This one is going to be in charge of cleaning the high end of the tom track and carving the low mid range of the tom track without using any extra EQ. As we did with the noise gate, make sure that the Enable MIDI feature is turned on. To clean the high end, we choose the band and we set it on expand mode. So the volume will come up with every MIDI note. I put the attack as fast as I can, adjust the release between 15 and 20%, and I make sure that I put the look ahead close to 20 milliseconds so it won't kill the transient. By the way, make sure that the look ahead is turned on. The rest of the options are left by default. So, in order to clean the low mids, solo the band and adjust the crossover until the spectrum analyzer looks almost like a wide bell. Let's start fiddling. That sounds good to me. Okay, the top end is cleaner now, but what about the low end? That's when JST Sub-Destroyer comes into play. What I'm going to do now is I am going to duplicate the MIDI track and I am going to rename it as Tom 3 Tail. This track will be in charge of recreating the tail and the decay of the tom. Then I will put an instance of JST Sub-Destroyer, making sure that sine wave mode is selected. And I will click on the MIDI tab. As you might know, this plugin works as a VST instrument, so we have to edit the MIDI notes this time. On the very consecutive fast notes, we have to make sure that we leave a small gap in between the notes, but on the very last note, or if it is just a note alone, you have to adjust all of them with the same length, and it has to be long enough to create the decay. I am going to start doing this process, so I'm going to fast forward it. Okay, done. Our next step is to know what the fundamental frequency of the tom track is. For that, we are going to mute the rest of the tracks. And we are going to bypass all the effects on the tom 3 track. Once we do that, we go to the master bus and we load an instance of FabFilter Pro Q3. If you check here on the bottom left corner, you will see a piano icon. This will tell me the note of the fundamental instead of telling me the frequency value. So I will analyze the audio file. And here's the note, E2. So now we are going to go to the tom tail track and we are going to edit the MIDI notes. Let me unmute it. So we select all the notes. It should be E2, but E0 sounds more reliable. Another thing that you might notice about the fundamental frequency, if you pay attention to the spectrum analyzer, is that it's not a static note. The pitch goes down gradually, but not in a very wide range, maybe between 1 to 3 semitones. So in order to recreate this pitch bend, let me close this, we are going to enable the effects and mute the track of the tom 3. and make sure that the tom tail is unmuted. We are going to select all the long notes or medium long notes, and we are going to duplicate them on a lower note. Control and click. I'm going to move them down like 2-3 semitones. Let's have a look. But what's even more important, we have to move the beginning of the notes further in time, so the pitch bend will happen. And how can we make that bend sound? There is a feature inside JST Subdestroyer called portamento. I put the value at its highest, 1000 milliseconds, because this way sounds more pleasant to me. If I go all the way down, the slide will be very abrupt. Let's make a comparison. This slide sounds more natural to me. Alright, the pitch bend is done, but what about the decay? This is the part of this trick that gets a bit more geeky. First of all, I want the decay to be triggered by the audio file. Let's unmute this and route this. For the sidechain to happen, here on the audio, instead of putting the output as 1, 2, we will select 3, 4. And on the MIDI tab, we will set it to none. This is very important. You have to set it on post fader, post pan. I will tell you why later on. Then we get inside JST Subdestroyer and we make a click on the volume knob. Once we do this, we go up here and we click on parameter modulation MIDI link. I'm going to explain you everything step by step. First of all, we have to make sure that it's ticked on the enable parameter modulation, and on the baseline value, we will put this all the way to the left. Once we do this, we click on audio control signal sidechain. Now, if you pay attention, when I move this fader, the volume knob will move as well. On the track audio channel, I will select the sidechain signal. That is our audio track with the gate and the multiband active. Then we get inside of audio control signal shaping, and I will create a shape similar to the waveform of the tail of the toms. Like this, I click and drag. I adjust the attack and the release with similar values to the noise gate. Around here. I will set the minimum volume to -60 dB, and the maximum volume will be adjusted in a way that the signal will reach the top of this curve with every hit. This way, we automate the volume to decrease after every hit. The last thing that we will do with JST Subdestroyer is to add some harmonics, because the original tail is not a pure fundamental frequency. So I will crank up the amount of the harmonic enhancement, make sure that this is enabled, and I will adjust the crossover to taste. Last but not least, we have to match the volume of the fundamental with the original one. For that purpose, we're going to use the EQ on the master chain, and I will visually check the spectrum analyzer to match them. So I am going to solo the audio track, bypass all the effects, and check how loud the fundamental frequency is. And then I will do an A/B comparison with the processing signal and the JST Subdestroyer applied. So let's do this. Actually, the fundamental frequency sounds lower to my ear, so what I'm going to do is I am going to select all the notes and I'm going to move them down.
Always trust your ears. The spectrum analyzer is a really useful tool, but always trust your ears. That volume sounds quite right for me. And the last thing you need to do is you go to File, Render, and you render your track. In this case, I'm going to name it Tom 3 Cleaner, and I'm going to start rendering. Well, we have our file rendered and put inside the track. I have created two buses, one with the acoustic tracks and another one with the cleaned ones, so we can make an A-B comparison before and after. For this time, I'm going to leave the overhead tracks on, and let's see how it sounds. Before and after. Let's make it even more noticeable. Let's turn off the overheads. Before and after. So that's how I clean and restore Tom tracks using JST Subdestroyer. Huge thanks to Joey Sturgis for counting on me to create this tutorial and for creating such amazing plugins. If you want to check more of his products, just visit his website at joeysturgistones.com. I hope you all guys enjoyed this video and hopefully see you soon.